In the heart of London, where history met modernity, a young royal guard named Private James Harrington stood tall outside one of the city's most iconic landmarks. His red tunic and towering bearskin hat made him an unmistakable symbol of tradition and discipline. Tourists from all over the world gathered around to take pictures, marveling at his perfect posture and unwavering focus. Children pointed excitedly, while adults whispered stories about the legendary dedication of the guards. But for James, this wasn't just a job, it was a calling. James had grown up in a small town far from the bustling streets of London. From a young age, he dreamed of serving his country with pride. He joined the military not only because he wanted to protect others, but also because he believed deeply in values like respect, honor, and unity. Standing there in the crisp morning air, he felt a quiet sense of purpose. No matter how many hours passed or how mundane the task seemed, James knew that every second counted. His role was to represent something greater than himself, a nation built on diversity, strength, and resilience. The park surrounding him buzzed with life. Families strolled hand in hand, street performers entertained passers-by, and pigeons fluttered across cobblestone paths. It was a peaceful scene, almost serene. Yet, amidst the harmony, there were always those who disrupted it, people whose attitudes clashed with the spirit of inclusivity that defined the city. On this particular day, one such individual approached the guarded area. His name was Richard Caldwell, a wealthy businessman known more for his arrogance than his kindness. Caldwell walked briskly, his expensive suit tailored perfectly, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. Beside him trotted a sleek Doberman, its muscles rippling beneath its dark coat. The dog's sharp eyes scanned the crowd as if searching for trouble. Caldwell carried himself with an air of superiority, sneering at anyone who didn't fit into his narrow view of what society should look like. When his gaze landed on James, he muttered under his breath, making derogatory comments about the guard's presence and purpose. To James, these kinds of remarks weren't new. Over the years, he'd heard similar words hurled at him by people who didn't understand or care about the sacrifices made by those in uniform. But James had learned long ago that reacting to hate only fueled it. Instead, he chose to rise above, letting his actions speak louder than any insult ever could. So, as Caldwell continued to mutter slurs, James remained still, his expression unreadable behind his stoic exterior. He focused on the horizon, his mind steady and calm, refusing to let negativity pierce his armor of professionalism. What James didn't realize, however, was that Caldwell wasn't content with mere words. This man thrived on power dynamics, feeding off moments when he could assert dominance over others. And today, he saw an opportunity. As Caldwell drew closer, his lips curled into a cruel smile. With a sharp tug on the leash, he unclipped it, freeing the Doberman. Pointing directly at James, he barked a command, "Go." The atmosphere shifted instantly. Gasps echoed through the crowd as the dog sprang forward, teeth bared and growling menacingly. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Everyone watched, holding their breath, unsure of what would happen next. Would the guard retaliate? Would chaos erupt? Or would something entirely unexpected unfold? As the Doberman lunged forward, its powerful legs propelling it with terrifying speed, panic rippled through the crowd. Parents instinctively pulled their children back, shielding them from the impending confrontation. Some tourists fumbled for their phones, eager to capture the scene unfolding before them, while others simply froze in shock. The once peaceful park now buzzed with tension, the air thick with uncertainty. Everyone expected violence, perhaps even chaos, as the dog barreled toward James, its teeth gleaming under the morning sun. But James Harrington was no ordinary man. Years of rigorous training had conditioned him to remain calm under pressure, and his instincts kicked in almost immediately. Though his heart raced, his outward demeanor betrayed none of the fear or adrenaline coursing through him. He stood firm, gripping his ceremonial rifle, a symbol of tradition rather than a weapon of combat. With swift precision, He raised the rifle horizontally, using it as a barrier between himself and the charging animal. The move was calculated, designed to protect both him and the dog without causing harm. The Doberman collided with the rifle, its momentum halted by the sturdy wooden stock. For a split second, the dog snarled ferociously, its eyes wild and its body tense, ready to strike again. But James didn't flinch. Instead, he took a deliberate step back, maintaining his balance while keeping the rifle steady. His actions were neither aggressive nor defensive in a way that provoked further attack. They were measured, controlled, and above all, humane. This wasn't just about self-preservation. It was about showing restraint when faced with hostility. Richard Caldwell smirked from a distance, clearly pleased with himself. He had expected the guard to retaliate violently, perhaps striking the dog or shouting angrily. Such a reaction would have played right into Caldwell's hands, giving him ammunition to justify his own prejudice. But what happened next left him visibly unsettled. Rather than escalating the situation, James knelt slowly, lowering himself to the dog's level. His movements were calm and deliberate, exuding an aura of confidence that seemed to disarm even the most aggressive creatures. Speaking softly, James addressed the dog in a tone so gentle it was almost soothing. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "It's okay. You're safe." At first, the Doberman hesitated, its ears twitching as if unsure how to respond. But something in James's demeanor must have reassured the animal because, after a few tense moments, the dog stopped growling. Its tail began to wag tentatively, and its once hostile stance softened. Within seconds, the transformation was remarkable. The same creature that had been poised to attack was now sniffing James's hand curiously, seemingly entranced by his calm energy. The crowd erupted into spontaneous applause, their initial fear replaced by awe and admiration. People cheered loudly, some whistling in approval while others clapped enthusiastically. A young boy in the front row shouted, "That's amazing." His words echoed the sentiment shared by everyone present. Even the tourists filming the incident couldn't help but smile, capturing not just the drama but the humanity of the moment. Here was a man who had turned a potentially dangerous situation into one of connection and understanding. Meanwhile, Caldwell's smug expression faltered. He had anticipated outrage, maybe even retaliation. But this display of grace and composure caught him entirely off guard. Watching the dog interact peacefully with James made him look petty and cruel by comparison. His jaw tightened, and his face flushed red, not from embarrassment, though that was certainly part of it, but from anger. How dare this lowly guard make him appear foolish in front of dozens of people? Caldwell tugged sharply on the leash, pulling the dog away from James. The sudden movement startled the animal, causing it to whimper slightly as it stumbled backward. Ignoring the discomfort he'd caused, Caldwell muttered another string of insults under his breath, this time directed at James. "You think you're better than me." He spat, his voice dripping with venom. "This isn't over." James, however, refused to engage. Rising slowly to his feet, he straightened his posture and met Caldwell's gaze with unwavering resolve. There was no hatred in his eyes, only quiet determination. Without saying a word, he communicated volumes, his silence speaking louder than any retort ever could. And as Caldwell stormed off, dragging the confused dog behind him, James returned to his post, resuming his position as though nothing had happened. Yet the ripple effects of what had transpired were undeniable. Cameras continued rolling, capturing every detail of the extraordinary encounter. Little did James know, this moment, the crowd's applause lingered in the air, a testament to the incredible display of restraint and compassion they had just witnessed. But James Harrington wasn't focused on the attention or the praise. For him, this was never about proving a point or seeking validation. It was about doing what was right, even when faced with hostility. As he stood tall once more, resuming his post, his mind replayed the moments that had unfolded. He thought about the dog, its initial aggression fueled not by malice, but by fear and confusion. And then there was Richard Caldwell, whose actions spoke volumes about his character, or lack thereof. Caldwell hadn't walked far before he turned back, glaring at James with undisguised contempt. His face was flushed, his fists clenched tightly around the leash, as if trying to channel his frustration into something tangible. The smugness he'd worn earlier had vanished, replaced by raw anger and humiliation. He couldn't believe what had just happened. Not only had his attempt to provoke the guard failed miserably, but it had also exposed him as someone who thrived on cruelty rather than courage. The irony wasn't lost on anyone watching. "You think you're so noble," Caldwell sneered, taking a step closer despite the distance between them. "Standing there like some kind of hero while people cheer for you. Let me tell you something. This isn't over." His voice carried across the square, loud enough for nearby spectators to hear. Some shook their heads in disgust, while others exchanged knowing glances. It was clear that Caldwell wasn't used to being challenged, especially not in such a public setting. James didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a deep breath, centering himself before addressing the man directly. When he finally spoke, his tone was calm yet firm, each word chosen carefully to convey respect without backing down. "Sir," he began, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd, "your actions today reflect poorly on you. Not me. You unleash your dog in a public space, endangering not only myself, but everyone here. That speaks volumes about your judgment." Caldwell flinched, though he tried to mask it with another scowl. James continued, undeterred. "And as for this being over," he paused briefly, locking eyes with Caldwell, "I hope it is. I hope you'll take a moment to reflect on why you felt the need to act this way. Because at the end of the day, we're all human beings, regardless of our differences. Treating others with kindness costs nothing. But hatred takes everything from you." The words hit Caldwell like a punch to the gut. They weren't laced with venom or designed to shame him publicly. Instead, they carried an undeniable truth that struck deeper than any insult ever could. For a fleeting second, his expression softened, as if he were truly considering what James had said. But pride quickly reared its ugly head, hardening his features once more. Without another word, he yanked the leash harshly and stormed off, disappearing into the crowd. As Caldwell retreated, the park seemed to exhale collectively. The tension dissipated, leaving behind a sense of awe and admiration for the young guard who had handled the situation with such dignity. People approached James cautiously, thanking him for his composure and sharing how inspired they felt by his actions. One elderly woman handed him a tissue, her hands trembling slightly as she said, "You reminded us all what true strength looks like, dear." Another man simply nodded, tears glistening in his eyes as he patted James on the shoulder. Despite the outpouring of gratitude, James remained humble. "It's my duty to serve," he replied softly, almost shyly. "But thank you for standing with me today." His words resonated deeply, reminding everyone present that unity often begins with small acts of courage. Unbeknownst to James, however, the story was far from over. Phones recorded every detail, capturing not just the confrontation, but the humanity that followed. Within hours, videos of the incident would flood social media platforms, sparking debates and discussions worldwide. Strangers thousands of miles away would find themselves moved by the quiet determination of a single guard who chose compassion over conflict. And Richard Caldwell. His name would become synonymous with prejudice, forcing him to confront the consequences of his actions in ways he never anticipated. For now, though, James returned to his post, steadfast and composed. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting golden rays over the historic landmark he guarded so proudly. If asked later, he might say the day had been ordinary, just another shift in a long line of service. But those who bore witness knew better. They knew they had seen something extraordinary, a reminder that even in the face of hatred, humanity could shine brighter than ever. Within hours, the incident in the park had gone viral. Footage of James Harrington's calm and composed response to Richard Caldwell's aggression spread like wildfire across social media platforms. People couldn't stop talking about it. Clips of the encounter were shared millions of times, accompanied by captions like "Grace Under Pressure" and "The Guard Who Tamed Hate." News outlets picked up the story, broadcasting interviews with eyewitnesses who described the scene in vivid detail. The world was captivated, not just by what had happened, but by how James had handled it. Tourists who had been present at the park became instant celebrities in their own right, recounting the moment for anyone willing to listen. One woman, a teacher from Canada, posted a heartfelt video online explaining how James's actions had restored her faith in humanity. "I've seen so much negativity lately," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "But watching that young man stand tall, not just physically but morally, it reminded me that kindness can still win. It's something I'll tell my students about for years to come." Meanwhile, James remained largely unaware of the storm brewing around him. After the confrontation with Caldwell, he had returned to his duties as if nothing unusual had occurred. For him, this was simply part of the job, handling unexpected challenges with professionalism and poise. But when his commanding officer called him into the office later that evening, James realized the situation had taken on a life of its own. His superior showed him screenshots of tweets praising his restraint, along with headlines declaring him a national hero. "You've made quite the impression, Private Harrington," the officer said with a rare smile. "People are calling you an example of everything good about our values. Keep doing what you're doing. It's making a difference." Though flattered, James felt humbled rather than triumphant. He didn't see himself as extraordinary. He was just someone trying to do the right thing, even when it wasn't easy. On the other side of the city, Richard Caldwell was experiencing a very different kind of attention. As news of the incident spread, so did his reputation, for all the wrong reasons. Social media users quickly identified him as the man behind the attack, labeling him as arrogant, racist, and cruel. Memes mocking his behavior flooded the internet, while petitions demanding accountability for his actions gained thousands of signatures. Local authorities received calls urging them to investigate whether Caldwell had violated any laws by unleashing his dog in a public space. At first, Caldwell tried to brush off the backlash. He dismissed the criticism as overblown nonsense, convinced that people would lose interest eventually. But as days passed, the pressure mounted. Friends distanced themselves, colleagues avoided eye contact, and strangers openly glared at him whenever he ventured outside. Even businesses he frequented began turning him away, unwilling to associate with someone whose name had become synonymous with prejudice. For the first time in his privileged life, Caldwell found himself facing consequences for his actions, and it shook him to his core. One evening, sitting alone in his opulent apartment, Caldwell stared at his phone, scrolling through endless comments condemning him. Some accused him of racism, others of animal cruelty. Each word stung more than he cared to admit. At first, he wanted to lash out, to defend himself against what he saw as unfair judgment. But deep down, he knew they weren't entirely wrong. His behavior that day had been fueled by arrogance and entitlement, traits he nurtured for far too long. And now, the entire world was holding a mirror up to his flaws. Those words stayed with Caldwell long after their meeting ended. Inspired by James's grace, he vowed to change, not just for himself, but for the countless lives he could impact positively. Little did either man know, their paths would continue to intersect in ways neither could have predicted, proving that even in moments of conflict, humanity has the power to heal. It was during one of these sleepless nights that Caldwell decided to reach out, not publicly, but privately. Through mutual acquaintances, he managed to obtain James's contact information and sent him a carefully worded message. "Private Harrington," it read, "I owe you an apology. What I did was wrong, and I regret it deeply. If you are willing to meet, I'd like to explain myself and make amends." To Caldwell's surprise, James responded promptly. "Thank you for reaching out," he wrote back. "Apologies mean little without action, but I'm willing to hear you out. Let's talk tomorrow afternoon." When they finally met the next day at a quiet cafe near the park, the atmosphere was tense yet hopeful. Caldwell arrived first, fidgeting nervously as he waited. When James walked in, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, Caldwell stood up awkwardly, unsure of how to begin. But James extended a hand, his expression warm and forgiving. "Let's start fresh," he said simply. Over coffee, Caldwell confessed his regrets, admitting that his actions stemmed from ignorance and misplaced anger. James listened patiently, nodding occasionally but never interrupting. When Caldwell finished, James spoke gently. "We all make mistakes," he said. "What matters is learning from them and striving to be better. I forgive you, but true redemption comes from your actions moving forward." The days following the meeting between James Harrington and Richard Caldwell marked the beginning of a profound transformation, not just for Caldwell, but for those around him. Though their conversation at the cafe had been brief, its impact lingered like ripples spreading across water. For Caldwell, it was a wake-up call, forcing him to confront the ugliness he had allowed to fester within himself. He couldn't unsee the way James had responded to hatred with compassion, nor could he ignore how his own actions had painted him as someone he barely recognized. Determined to make amends, Caldwell began small. The first step was addressing his relationship with his Doberman, Max. In the past, Caldwell had treated the dog more like an accessory than a living being, something to showcase his wealth and status. But now, he decided to learn what it truly meant to care for another creature. He enrolled in obedience classes, not because Max needed training, but because he did. Each session became a lesson in patience, empathy, and responsibility. Slowly, Caldwell started seeing Max not as a tool for intimidation, but as a loyal companion deserving love and respect. Word of Caldwell's efforts reached local animal shelters, where volunteers were initially skeptical. Could someone so publicly vilified really change? Yet, when Caldwell offered to volunteer his time helping abused and abandoned animals, they reluctantly agreed to let him try. At first, he felt out of place among people who radiated warmth and kindness, while he struggled to find the right words or actions. But over time, he found solace in the work. Cleaning cages, walking dogs, and feeding cats gave him purpose, grounding him in ways his corporate life never had. One day, while playing fetch with a scrappy terrier named Daisy, Caldwell realized something remarkable. These animals didn't judge him based on his past mistakes. They accepted him simply for showing up and caring. It was a humbling reminder that redemption wasn't about erasing one's history. It was about building a better future, one small act at a time. Meanwhile, James Harrington continued to inspire others through his quiet leadership. After the incident, he received countless letters from strangers thanking him for restoring their faith in humanity. Some shared personal stories of overcoming prejudice, while others expressed gratitude for his example of grace under pressure. One letter stood out. A young boy named Liam wrote to say he wanted to become a soldier someday, inspired by James's courage and kindness. Enclosed was a drawing of a guard standing tall beside a smiling dog, with the caption, "Heroes don't have to be superheroes." Touched by the note, James replied personally, encouraging Liam to always stand up for what was right, even when it was hard. Their exchange sparked a friendship, with Liam sending updates on his school projects and James sharing stories about life as a Royal Guard. To Liam, James wasn't just a role model. He was proof that ordinary people could do extraordinary things. As weeks turned into months, the ripple effects of that fateful day in the park grew larger. News outlets revisited the story, highlighting Caldwell's journey toward redemption alongside James's continued advocacy for unity and understanding. Together, their lives became intertwined in a narrative of hope and healing. While some critics dismissed Caldwell's efforts as too little, too late, many applauded his willingness to change. After all, true growth often begins with acknowledging one's flaws and taking steps to fix them. Even Caldwell's former detractors softened slightly upon witnessing his dedication. A local journalist wrote an article titled "From Villain to Volunteer," chronicling his work at the shelter. Readers flooded the comments section, debating whether forgiveness should extend to someone like Caldwell. But amidst the heated discussions, one comment stood out: "Hate destroys us. Forgiveness heals us. Let's focus on the good this man is doing now instead of dwelling on the bad." By year's end, Caldwell had become a regular fixture at the shelter, organizing fundraisers and adoption events to support its mission. His newfound passion even led him to sponsor educational programs aimed at teaching children about responsible pet ownership and empathy toward animals. Though he still carried the weight of his past actions, he no longer let it define him. Instead, he channeled it into fuel for positive change. For James, the experience reinforced his belief in the power of compassion. Whether guarding historic landmarks or responding to acts of aggression, he remained steadfast in his commitment to lead by example. He often reflected on the encounter with Caldwell. The story of James Harrington and Richard Caldwell continued to capture the imagination of people around the world. But it wasn't just their individual journeys that fascinated everyone. It was the way their lives had intertwined. What started as a clash of values in a London park had evolved into a powerful narrative about growth, redemption, and the enduring potential for change. As months passed, the ripple effects of their encounter reached far beyond what either man could have imagined. James's quiet heroism earned him recognition not only from the public, but also from his superiors. One crisp autumn morning, he was summoned to a formal ceremony at Buckingham Palace, where he was awarded a commendation for exemplary conduct during the incident with Caldwell's dog. The award itself was modest, a plaque engraved with words of gratitude, but its significance carried immense weight. It symbolized more than just professionalism. It celebrated the humanity James had shown in the face of hostility. During the ceremony, high-ranking officers praised James not only for his restraint, but also for his ability to inspire others. Private Harrington reminded us all that true strength lies not in dominance or aggression. One officer said, addressing the gathered crowd, "It lies in compassion, patience, and the courage to rise above hatred." He is a credit to this institution and to our nation. As applause filled the room, James stood tall, his expression humble yet proud. For him, the real reward wasn't the accolade. It was knowing that his actions had sparked meaningful conversations about unity and respect. While James basked in well-deserved praise, Richard Caldwell worked tirelessly to rebuild his reputation. Volunteering at the animal shelter had given him a new sense of purpose, but he knew he needed to do more. Determined to make amends on a larger scale, he partnered with local organizations to launch an initiative aimed at combating prejudice and promoting inclusivity. Dubbed Pause for Peace, the program brought together diverse groups of people through shared activities, like dog training workshops and community cleanup events. The goal was simple: foster understanding by creating opportunities for connection. Caldwell's efforts didn't go unnoticed. Media outlets that had once vilified him now covered his transformation with cautious optimism. A feature article in a prominent magazine highlighted how far he'd come since the infamous park incident. "Richard Caldwell isn't perfect," the writer noted. "But perfection isn't the point. What matters is progress." And Caldwell's journey shows us that even those who've made grave mistakes can choose to do better. Public reaction to Caldwell's initiatives was mixed. Some remained skeptical, questioning whether his actions were genuine or merely an attempt to salvage his image. Others, however, chose to give him the benefit of the doubt. Among them was Sarah Bennett, a social worker who collaborated with Caldwell on several projects. "I won't pretend I wasn't hesitant at first," she admitted in an interview, "but seeing him interact with participants, listening to their stories, rolling up his sleeves alongside them, it's clear he's committed to making a difference. That takes guts." As Caldwell's work gained traction, he and James crossed paths again. Not in private, as before, but publicly. Invited to speak at a charity gala honoring kindness and resilience, they shared the stage, each reflecting on their experiences. James spoke first, recounting the day in the park with characteristic humility. "That moment wasn't about me versus him," he said, gesturing toward Caldwell. "It was about choosing how we respond when faced with adversity. We can let anger consume us, or we can find ways to connect. I'm grateful we chose connection." When it was Caldwell's turn to speak, his voice trembled slightly, betraying the depth of his emotions. "I'll never forget the lesson Private Harrington taught me that day," he began. "He showed me that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's strength, and he inspired me to become someone worthy of that forgiveness." Pausing for a moment, he looked directly at James. "Thank you for believing in second chances." Their speeches brought the audience to its feet, applause echoing through the grand hall. Cameras flashed as the two men shook hands, their bond a testament to the power of redemption. For many in attendance, it was a poignant reminder that no one is beyond hope, that even the most unlikely individuals can come together to create something beautiful. In the weeks that followed, images of James and Caldwell standing side by side went viral once again. This time, though, the tone was different. Headlines declared enemies turned allies, and a story of forgiveness and growth. Social media buzzed with messages of encouragement, urging others to follow their example. Teachers used the story in classrooms to teach students about empathy and resilience. Even late-night talk show hosts joked about it, quipping, "If these two can bury the hatchet, maybe there's hope for the rest of us." For both men, the journey wasn't over. They still had much to learn and accomplish. But as they parted ways after the gala, they did so with a shared understanding. They had taken the first steps toward healing not just themselves, but also the communities they touched. Their story proved that while hatred may divide us, acts of courage and compassion have the power to unite, even in the unlikeliest of circumstances. The bond between James Harrington and Richard Caldwell, forged in the crucible of conflict and redemption, continued to grow stronger with time. What had once seemed impossible, a friendship between two men from vastly different worlds, became a reality that inspired countless others. Their story was no longer just about the day in the park. It had evolved into a living example of how understanding and forgiveness could bridge even the widest divides. James returned to his duties as a royal guard, but his role expanded beyond standing sentinel at historic landmarks. He began using his newfound platform to speak publicly about the importance of unity and empathy. Schools invited him to give talks, where he shared stories not only of his encounter with Caldwell, but also of moments throughout his life when kindness had made all the difference. His message was simple yet profound. We don't have to agree on everything to treat each other with respect. Sometimes, the smallest acts of compassion can change someone's entire perspective. Children especially gravitated toward James, drawn to his warmth and humility. During one school visit, a shy girl named Emily approached him after his speech, clutching a notebook filled with sketches. She showed him a drawing of herself standing beside a soldier who looked remarkably like James. Beneath it, she'd written, "I want to be brave like you." Moved by her words, James knelt down to her level and said softly, "You already are brave, Emily. Just keep being kind. That's what makes real heroes." While James focused on spreading positivity, Caldwell poured his energy into expanding Pause for Peace. The initiative grew rapidly, attracting volunteers from all walks of life. From retired teachers to young professionals, people came together to support its mission of fostering inclusivity through shared experiences. One particularly successful event involved pairing shelter dogs with participants from diverse backgrounds for a day of training and bonding. Laughter echoed across the park as strangers became friends, united by their love for animals and their desire to make a difference. Caldwell often reflected on how much he had changed since that fateful day. Once consumed by arrogance and prejudice, he now found joy in helping others. Working alongside James during several Pause for Peace events deepened their connection, turning an unlikely alliance into a genuine friendship. They discovered they had more in common than either had expected. Both valued discipline, both believed in service, and both understood the weight of responsibility. Over coffee after long days of volunteering, they would talk openly about their struggles and triumphs, finding comfort in knowing they weren't alone. Their partnership didn't go unnoticed. A documentary filmmaker approached them with the idea of creating a film chronicling their journey, from adversaries to allies. At first, Caldwell hesitated, worried about reopening old wounds. But James encouraged him, saying, "This isn't just our story anymore. It belongs to everyone who's ever needed hope or a second chance." Together, they agreed to participate, hoping the project would inspire others facing similar challenges. Filming took place over several months, capturing intimate moments of reflection, as well as lively scenes from Pause for Peace events. Viewers saw Caldwell interacting with children, teaching them how to care for animals while emphasizing the importance of treating others with kindness. They watched James speaking passionately to crowds, his words resonating deeply with listeners of all ages, and they witnessed the two men laughing together, their camaraderie a testament to the transformative power of forgiveness. When the documentary premiered, it received widespread acclaim. Critics praised its raw honesty and uplifting message, calling it a beacon of hope in uncertain times. Audiences left theaters wiping away tears, inspired by the reminder that change is always possible, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. Social media lit up with hashtags like #SecondChances and #KindnessMatters as viewers pledged to follow James and Caldwell's example in their own lives. For Caldwell, the film marked another milestone in his journey. Public perception of him shifted dramatically, with many expressing admiration for his willingness to confront his past and work toward a better future. Though some skepticism remained, he welcomed it as proof that trust must be earned, not given freely. "I know I'll never erase what I did," he told an interviewer. "But if my actions today can help someone see the world differently, then every step forward is worth it." As for James, the documentary reinforced his belief in the ripple effect of compassion. Watching strangers embrace the values he held dear reminded him why he chose this path in the first place. Whether guarding history or shaping the future, he remained steadfast in his commitment to lead by example. His friendship with Caldwell proved that even the most unexpected connections could yield extraordinary results. Together, they stood as living proof that humanity's greatest strength lies not in division, but in unity. Their story wasn't perfect. It was messy, complicated, and unfinished, but that was precisely what made it so powerful. It showed the world that redemption isn't reserved for heroes in novels. It's available to anyone willing to take the first step. And sometimes, all it takes is one act of courage to set the wheels of change in motion. Years after the incident in the park, the story of James Harrington and Richard Caldwell had become a cornerstone of conversations about forgiveness, redemption, and the power of human connection. What began as a tense confrontation had transformed into a legacy that inspired countless lives across the globe. Their journey was no longer just their own. It belonged to everyone who had ever doubted the possibility of change or yearned for a world where compassion triumphed over hatred. James continued to serve proudly as a royal guard, but his role evolved far beyond ceremonial duties. He became an ambassador of sorts, traveling to schools, community centers, and conferences to share his message of hope and resilience. His speeches often ended with the same simple yet profound reminder. Every day we're given a choice: to respond to anger with more anger, or to answer hatred with love. Choose wisely, because your actions don't just define you. They ripple outward, touching lives you may never meet. These words resonated deeply, especially among young people who saw James as proof that ordinary individuals could make extraordinary impacts. Meanwhile, Richard Caldwell's transformation remained a beacon of hope for those struggling with their own past mistakes. Through Pause for Peace, he helped thousands of animals find loving homes while fostering connections between people from diverse backgrounds. The initiative expanded internationally, inspiring similar programs in cities around the world. Caldwell frequently credited James for setting him on this path, often saying, He didn't just forgive me. He showed me what it means to truly live with purpose. The documentary about their journey won several awards, further amplifying its reach. It was screened in classrooms, community halls, and even corporate boardrooms, sparking discussions about accountability, empathy, and second chances. Teachers used it as a tool to teach students about conflict resolution, while businesses incorporated its lessons into leadership training programs. One viewer wrote to James and Caldwell, saying, "Your story reminded me that no matter how broken things seem, there's always room for healing. Thank you for showing us the way." Despite their growing fame, both men remained grounded, choosing to focus on the work rather than the accolades. They often joked that they were an odd pair, a disciplined soldier and a reformed businessman. But their differences only strengthened their partnership. Whether organizing charity events or mentoring troubled youth, they complemented each other perfectly, proving that unity doesn't require sameness. It thrives on diversity. One particularly memorable moment came when Emily, the shy girl who had once drawn a picture of herself standing beside James, returned to thank him years later. Now a teenager, she proudly told him she was volunteering at her local animal shelter, inspired by his example. Caldwell, who happened to be visiting the same shelter during one of his outreach efforts, joined the conversation. Together, the three planted a tree on the shelter grounds, symbolizing growth, renewal, and the enduring power of kindness. As time went on, James and Caldwell grew older, but their commitment to making the world a better place never wavered. James eventually retired from active duty, transitioning into full-time advocacy work. Caldwell, too, slowed down, though he continued to support Paws for Peace until his final days. When Caldwell passed away peacefully at home, surrounded by loved ones, including Max, the Doberman who had started it all, James delivered a heartfelt eulogy at the funeral. He taught us that no one is defined solely by their worst moments. James said, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. Richard chose to rise above his flaws, not because it was easy, but because it was right. And in doing so, he reminded us all of our capacity for change. In the years that followed, James often visited the tree Emily, Caldwell, and he had planted together. Beneath its sprawling branches, he reflected on how far they'd come, and how much farther their story would continue to travel. Though Caldwell was gone, his legacy lived on in every person touched by Paws for Peace and every child inspired to act with courage and kindness. Their tale became timeless, a testament to the idea that humanity is capable of incredible things when we choose understanding over judgment and compassion over cruelty. From a single moment in a London park, two men had sparked a movement that transcended borders, cultures, and generations. And though neither James nor Caldwell sought recognition, their names will forever be etched in history, not as adversaries turned allies, but as symbols of hope, proving that even amidst conflict, light can emerge from darkness, and grace can conquer hate.